The ability to draw and be resourced by how different traditions have found and articulate the expressions of God has just made my faith that much richer. I suppose my ethnic heritage, I trace my ancestry back to southwestern Nigeria, where I was born and grew up until the age of about 25. I was born into a family that would probably have largely described itself as Anglican, even though by the time I came to maturity as a family, we weren't attending the Anglican church and exploring what it means to be an Anglican or willing to find faith within the Church of England. For me, started in the UK. It was quite a challenge to now find myself in a context where if it couldn't be subject to reason, it did not exist. And I think over time it's been a constant sense, or if you like to use what's become a cliche now, a journey of redefining what being a Christian means within that context. It's fascinating to get in the car and do a journey in the UK without necessarily having started with prayers for safety on the road, prayers against accidents. You then, ask the question, well, if the safety and security of the journey is presumed, what role does faith play? Which for me, it's a constant play and constant reflection. Leads me back to I think a place in Proverbs or the Psalms where it says, "Whatever you do, God, don't let me have so much wealth that I forget you, or have so much poverty that I turn my hands to stealing." So I would leave to your imagination exactly which of the contexts is, the poverty or the wealth. But yeah, it's that. Yeah. Even within the, if you like, the constraints of human agency, the very course of my life is determined and held precious in God's sight, and there is nothing that's going to happen that's going to be beyond God's ability to intervene, God's ability or guidance, and if you like, awareness of. So that it's at no point have I felt that any part of me is accidental, which I probably would trace back to my heritage, Yoruba culture flowing into or being adapted into some of the Christian concept, the idea that even though God is determining the course of one's life, there is an active part. There is the agency which I have in determining the outcomes of that. And there is a rich sense in which my faith then becomes an invitation to walk with the Almighty in actively determining the outcomes of my life, which then almost presupposes that I would want to pray, want to engage God, want to have a total dependence in God's ability to determine what I do with my life as well as the outcomes. Yeah, I was in a role that meant I engaged with leaders within the Nigerian and Ghanaian diaspora communities in London, and I happened to have a fairly random conversation with someone who then was a vicar in North London. Because for me, it was fairly strange that as a Nigerian, he would be an Anglican vicar. I would have, from my understanding then, I would have thought he would be pastor of a fairly Pentecostal church. And asked him, what his journey was about. And after having listened to him, he turned the conversation around and asked, "What about you?" Suddenly finding myself on the receiving end, it was very uncomfortable, and I was at a loss as to how to reply. I didn't say anything. Then he looked at me and, quoting from Psalm 137, asked this question which I had never thought about within the context of that psalm. And he says, what if for the Israelites, their time in Babylon, what if Babylon for them was a mission field? It resonated with me because at that time, the church where I worshiped had no contact with the local community. We had no contact with our neighbors apart from the fact that we disturbed them on a Sunday morning. I said to myself, oh, wow, that's interesting. How am I reaching my community for Christ? And that question never left me. And strangely enough, after having had that conversation, everywhere I looked, I saw somebody in a collar. I began to push doors and explore the nation and have conversations. And as God will have it, every door I pushed swung open much faster than I could push it. It was almost as though the time was right. And I find myself here. There is a particular urgency, not just within the church, but within wider culture of the need to embrace or engage with the diversity of traditions and histories available within the community. The ability to draw and be resourced by how different traditions have found and articulate the expressions of God has just made my faith that much richer. The challenge, posed the wider community and the need to understand, engage, and relate to people of other traditions and faiths, to be able to be energized by God's unique ability to manifest and present God's self within those contexts. Our expressions of interrelatedness will be that much richer for our ability to embrace and engage with other traditions. What if this is your mission field? What if this is the reason God has called you to this space? What is the reasons you find yourself here? 10 years down the line from having had that conversation, I now realize that what God had in mind was for the opportunity to have my own faith, the horizons of my faith and understanding of God broadened and enriched by engaging with the opportunity to serve God, by engaging with the opportunity to reach other people. The opportunity to meet with people who would not describe themselves as Christians, or people who might not describe themselves as members of your congregation. And yet in conversation, you find the reality of an engagement with the other, the reality of an engagement with God, the reality and the language of God pervading the conversation, even though for love nor money, they wouldn't allude to that. It's always exciting. And for me, it has to be the thrill of this past year. And it's definitely something I'm finding myself looking forward to in every encounter with somebody outside the doors of church, that opportunity to see where God is at with them. Yeah.